I know this video is long overdue, I am terribly sorry about the wait time, but with that being said, I can't wait to dive into this masterpiece of an arc, better known as Arlong Park. First off, I just wanted to mention yet again how much I'm loving this series. Now, as the title says, I have both seen the anime and read the manga for this arc, so my review will be coming from both perspectives. For context, I've seen up to the end of East Blue. I certainly wanted to go further in the story, but I kept stopping myself until I got out this review. But going forward, I definitely hope to pick up the pace as I am loving this story. I started my One Piece journey a few months ago by first watching the anime for the East Blue. Since then, I've gone back, I've gotten my hands on the manga because of the amount of people who recommended reading the manga, so I've read all of the East Blue manga as well. I must say, I really do enjoy the different perspectives I get from both the anime and the manga, and I don't necessarily prefer one or the other, but I do think I wouldn't enjoy either one quite as much without the other. Now, I'm about to say something that could be seen as controversial, I'm not really sure or not, but for this particular arc, just Arlong Park, I'm not speaking about the anime and the manga in totality, but for this particular arc, I do think I prefer the anime version just slightly more than the manga. And the main reasons for that are the extra time and scenes I get to soak into the world of One Piece in the anime, and the extra layers I get with the soundtrack and the voice acting. Now, please don't get me wrong, since I really did enjoy the manga as well, but if I had to choose one I preferred just slightly more for this arc, I would go with the anime. And just in case you haven't seen my first two reviews, to briefly summarize my thoughts coming into this arc, when I first started One Piece I was definitely a little hesitant to really commit to the series because of the sheer length, and the first three arcs kind of piqued my curiosity, but they didn't sell me on the series. It was actually only about halfway through the last arc, Baratier, that I was really sold on the series. But I will say, if I wasn't sold on the series at the Baratier arc, then the Arlong Park arc would have definitely sold me. And I suppose looking back as more time has passed, what really sold me on this series was the incredible world building. Sure, I love other elements such as the lighthearted comedy and the silliness, or some of the more emotional moments the characters make me feel, particularly when I get to see their backstories. But really the world building is perhaps the greatest I've felt with any series. And the fact that I've only gotten through a small fraction of the series makes me incredibly excited for what awaits me in the future. So I realize I've droned on a little bit, now time to get into the arc. Throughout this review I mostly wanted to focus in on Nami since by all intents and purposes this is the Nami arc. Going into this arc I got to see a lot of our crew's backstories except Nami's, so I knew we would get it here, and as a viewer it felt like with every backstory I saw somehow they became even darker and more traumatic with each subsequent one. And I never truly felt connected with each of these characters until I saw their backstories and motivations. So with this arc I was fascinated to see exactly what made Nami the person she is, and also explain the mystery around her character such as why she left the crew. However, I certainly didn't predict just how dark and traumatic her backstory would truly be. Now, I will say that the last arc set up quite well that Nami was dealing with some sort of past trauma that pulled her away from the crew. It never felt to me like this was some elaborate plan from the start to trick the crew so that she could steal their ship and all their possessions, but rather a spur-of-the-moment decision brought upon by reliving some past trauma when she saw that Arlong bounty. So the mystery around Nami's character for me in this arc was not if she was bad or if she was faking it the whole time, but rather what was she dealing with and how would the crew rescue her from it. One of my favorite scenes of the last arc and really of the anime in totality was when we just got a little scene of Nami sailing away on her own to Arlong Park and she was just breaking down. She was very tearful, she was just wondering if the guys would ever accept her back. I must admit, even thinking of that scene makes me start to get a little emotional, which tells me just how much I genuinely care about these characters. Because sure, you could look at it and say they're just all made up characters, this story isn't real, but that doesn't stop them from feeling real to me and making me care about their past and even their future dreams. I think that's a credit to One Piece is how it can immerse the audience in its story. Because the characters in their crew feel like real people, which might sound funny because of some of their abilities, like Luffy is legitimately a rubber man, Sanji only fights with his feet, things like that. Yeah, sure, the world is rather wacky and goofy, but the characters themselves feel like real individuals. But a large part of the intrigue for me coming into this arc was the mystery around Nami, and it only heightened when she arrives at Arlong Park and reveals she is a member of the Arlong Pirates. Now I want to take a moment to talk about this arc's main villain, Arlong. Personally, I think Arlong is the best villain of the East Blue Saga, mostly because he also feels like he's the most evil. I will say, if anything, I probably saw Arlong as even more dangerous than he truly was, but I don't think that's a bad thing because it definitely built up the villain in my mind. Also, Don Krieg in the previous arc seemed to have given Luffy all he could handle, and one of the quotes is that Arlong makes Don Krieg look like a pussycat, so in my mind, Arlong was built up to be a very dangerous individual. But also when you see him both catch and crush a cannonball with his mouth, not to mention picking up and throwing entire buildings. Upon seeing Arlong, the first impression I got was just how supremely confident he seemed in his abilities and just like he was completely untouchable. From his smirk to his maniacal laugh, he seemed like someone who didn't really fear anyone around him, which in my opinion actually made him a great foe for Luffy, because in many ways they do share a lot of characteristics with each other. I know that might sound a little crazy on face value, but if you look at it, both characters are supremely confident, have grand aspirations, incredibly loyal to their crews because while Arlong is a bad guy, he still cares about his crew. They just obviously have very different ways of operating. Arlong is of course a very prejudiced, evil individual who commits many heinous acts, but it was almost this idea to me of an unstoppable force meets an immovable object and seeing who would prevail. And just seeing the sheer scale of Arlong compared to someone like Luffy, he seemed like a very threatening villain. So as I get to see Arlong more and more throughout the arc and you realize a lot of the horrible stuff he's done, it only opens up more questions about Nami because she's working for this person like Arlong. Because why would she do something like this knowing the kind of person Arlong is? So the whole mystery around Nami was one of the more captivating things to me about this arc. And I truly enjoyed getting little details dropped about what kind of person Nami was, some of her motivations, maybe some of her backstory, before finally revealing exactly why she's doing what she's doing. And one of the things I think this arc does well is how it divides up our different crew members so that they each are learning different things about Nami depending on where they are on the island. Such as when Usopp runs into Nami's sister Nojiko, we get a little bit of information about Nami. Nami throughout this arc tries her hardest to play the selfish pirate who only cares for gold with no allegiance to anyone, but I love when this is first challenged with her interaction with Zoro. So I must admit, Zoro has become one of my favorites because not only is he pretty cool, but he also has this undying loyalty to his captain. However, one of the more underrated aspects of Zoro, at least to me, is his emotional intelligence. When brought in front of the Arlong pirates and told about Nami's betrayal, and even hearing it from her that she never cared about them, he sees through it all. And he even puts his life on the line by jumping into the water behind him so that Nami is forced to make a choice. And he turns out to be correct because Nami jumps in after him to save him, proving to him that she actually cared about them. Even later, she frees Zoro from his cell, tells him to get lost because she does care for the crew she traveled with, but she also can't bring herself to explain the situation to them or ask for their help. However, just when it seemed like I was beginning to understand Nami, they did throw in a little bit of a wrinkle when they show her appearing to stab and kill Usopp. Now I must admit, while there was a brief moment where I questioned if he actually died, I don't think I ever truly believed that Usopp was dead, because I was looking at it thinking, okay, I'm assuming Nami is going to join the crew and I'm assuming Usopp isn't going to die this early on in the story, so I kind of put two and two together, but I must admit there was a split second before I thought about it where I was a little confused, especially because of the amount of blood everywhere. But then not only seeing that it was a fake out death, and actually injure herself so she could secure Usopp's safety. I think that was another incredible moment where it shows that even though she only knew this crew for a little bit of time, she would actually still go to some crazy lengths to secure their safety. And Usopp's journey throughout this whole arc I think is an interesting one. I get that he's kind of a little bit of comedic relief with some of the cowardice and stuff like that, but I do find myself more on the side of actually liking his character. Mostly because I find myself sympathizing with him because he's in a world with all these crazy people with all these abilities and strengths and stuff like that. But I find it so interesting how he fluctuates so rapidly between cowardice one second and bravery the next. There are moments where he's cowering and then all of a sudden he stands up for those around him, like when he fired on Arlong earlier despite how afraid he was of Arlong, because he wanted to save the people of Kokoyashi village from further harm. Now, I will say, I do hope that as more time goes on, the cowardly side diminishes and I see a lot more character progression. I hope it's the kind of thing where even if it takes a while, he does slowly but surely become the brave warrior he wanted to be. I must say, to me, it felt like Luffy was largely sidelined for a bulk of this arc. But I didn't mind it because we got to focus more on characters like Nami and to a lesser extent Zoro and Usopp. But eventually Luffy does arrive in a very Luffy way by flying in style. And I couldn't help but be incredibly impressed with Luffy during this whole arc. Because sure, he still had his fair share of goofy moments, but I believe he truly showed why he is the captain in this arc. Because when informed that Nami had killed Usopp, Luffy doesn't buy it for a second, instead choosing to rely on what he knows Nami to be. Even when Nami herself coldly told him and the crew to leave, pretending she never cared about them, he actually shows a lot of emotional intelligence and refuses to listen to what she's saying, instead relying on who he believes her to be. And he does this by just laying down in the middle of the road. Because the way I viewed it is Nami is already a member of the crew to Luffy, and he's not just gonna leave a member of the crew behind. Now, eventually Usopp does turn up and it's revealed, of course, that he's alive. I do like some of the banter between Sanji and Zoro that we're getting to see throughout this arc. However, the way I kind of view Sanji and Zoro's relationship is they're kind of good friends but won't ever admit it to each other. But eventually it seems like all of my questions will be answered when Nojiko turns up and offers to explain Nami's past to them. And again, it surprised me in the moment, but I really love what Luffy does here. Because Luffy just says, I'm not interested in her past, and he just walks away. He doesn't care what she might have done in the past, he just wants to know how he can help so that he can get his navigator back, which I absolutely love. But as I mentioned, we finally get all of our questions answered with an incredibly heart-wrenching flashback. We get to see a young Nami interact with some of the townspeople, including her relationship with her sister Nojiko and adoptive mother Bellamere. Sure, Nami never had a perfect childhood, she even says she hated being poor and she often stole things, but overall she was very happy. And you had this very peaceful village only for everything to change overnight when Arlong and his pirates storm in, they take over the village, they demand each person pay an amount for their lives. All of this culminating in just an incredibly tragic moment when her mom makes the selfless decision to forfeit her own life to make sure her daughter's payment was met. And if this wasn't heart-wrenching enough, after her mom's death at Arlong's hands, after he had just terrorized her village, Nami makes the huge sacrifice of actually turning on her village, everyone she knew, so that she could join the person who caused her so much pain to selflessly make a deal to free them all. The impact is only heightened when you see how the townspeople turn on her when she turns up as an Arlong pirate. And I truly loved seeing this backstory because my first impressions of Nami when she was introduced was she seemed to be a very selfish character, only for that viewpoint of mine to be challenged as she progressed, even from the first arc we saw her in Orange Town. Because even right from the start, she still cared about Luffy and Zoro's well-being. Sure, she still loves money and stuff like that, but she's not as selfish as I initially thought. And upon learning all of this in her backstory, which I think is an incredibly beautiful backstory, I love the way One Piece writes backstories because without these backstories, I don't think I'd be nearly as attached to these characters. But after this backstory, Nami's character made perfect sense to me, and in that moment I wanted nothing more than just for the crew to show up and help her out. But then shortly after revealing the backstory, just as it seems like Nami can accomplish all of her goals, she's right on the brink of actually paying Arlong to free her whole village, and it seems like, okay, she's actually going to be able to get it done herself. Arlong betrays their deal and uses the Marines to go and steal all of her hard work and possessions, and just in that moment, seeing all of her years of hard work just down the drain, I just remember feeling so bad for her in that moment. And then to see Nami completely break down, realizing that all of this has been for nothing, that she would essentially forever be Arlong's prisoner, was just a truly heartbreaking moment. Additionally, hearing Genzo tell her that he and the entire village knew all along that she was trying to free them, and that they only pretended so that she didn't feel like she owed them and that she could leave at any moment, I just love how that added to the impact of the moment. And then even the moment where Nami is trying to keep herself from entirely breaking down, saying she can save up and stuff like that, Genzo and the village coming together and saying, you fought for us, now we're gonna go and fight for you. And by all intents and purposes, it seems like Nami is about to have to watch her entire village go and get slaughtered by Arlong. So all of this hard work has been for nothing, and she just entirely breaks down and starts sobbing, of course even horrifically stabbing her arm, trying to get that tattoo off. And even I was just breaking down watching this. This is easily the most heart-wrenching moment I've seen so far in One Piece, because as she's stabbing herself, Luffy walks over and he stops her, and you just have a tearful Nami. She's saying, I told you to leave, why are you still here? And in just a vulnerable moment for her, she turns to her captain and says, "Luffy, help me." It is just such a perfect moment. How could you not get emotional seeing that? And if that wasn't good enough, Luffy's response could not have been better, because what seems to be a very simple gesture of just taking his straw hat and placing it on her head, I love this moment of realization from Nami when she remembers just how important his hat is and how much it amplifies this gesture. Because Luffy just handed her his most valuable possession, his treasure. And then of course seeing Luffy saying, "Yeah, of course I'm gonna help," and then walking towards the crew who have been waiting for his command. And I can't remember going from such a heartbreaking scene where I was just incredibly emotional to one where I was just so excited for what was about to happen. Because you go from this heartbreaking scene with Nami to one where Luffy and the crew walk towards Arlong Park, and this whole walk is just legendary. This is one of those moments where I believe the anime does it better than the manga, because you get to see the whole long walking sequence, but also you hear the triumphant music in the background. And this all culminates in Luffy bursting into Arlong Park, sending Arlong flying. And I just love the reason he gives for why he's doing this, and it's as simple as, "Because you made our navigator cry." Because it is incredibly powerful to me that Luffy doesn't know all the stuff Arlong has done in the past. He arrived at the village, he didn't hear Nami's backstory, he doesn't really know much of anything. All he knows is that Arlong hurt Nami and Nami asked Luffy for his help, and that was enough. And then of course we finally get this big battle between Luffy and his crew versus Arlong and his crew. Now I really do appreciate how this fight was not simply Luffy beating up Arlong and the other pirates and the fight was over. Instead, each member of the crew has an opponent suited for them and they get to make their contribution. Now in a funny sequence of events, Luffy gets sidelined in the fight when he gets stuck in the ground and then thrown into the ocean. So this creates kind of an interesting situation which raises the stakes, because Luffy just can't beat up everyone and save the day himself. Instead, he needs to be rescued while the others fight off the pirates. Now the standout character of the whole fight to me was actually Usopp, because he has an incredible moment during the fight. So after he runs off away from a fisherman chasing him, he pretends to die, he covers himself in ketchup, and the fisherman thinks he's dead, so he leaves him alone. So he's in the clear and he thinks to himself, like, how is he going to lie, make it seem like he wasn't a coward? And he has this great moment where he realizes what he's doing is shameful. And he gains the courage in that moment to actually face the fisherman. And I love what he says, because he has this quote about Luffy and the others, how they live every day like there's no tomorrow, which is why they can laugh so heartily, and he wants to laugh just like they do, so he needs to become a brave warrior. And I think this was a great moment for Usopp, because yeah, what he was doing was pretty shameful. He was rubbing himself with dirt, he was thinking of ways to make his lie more believable instead of actually mustering up any courage, and he does muster up the courage to his credit, and eventually he overcomes the fisherman. Now Zoro and Sanji get to show off more of their fighting skills. I do like how Sanji only uses his legs, and how Zoro has of course his three-sword style, clearly still injured from his last fight. And I like that he does feel the extent of his injuries from the last fight. Like, that isn't just waved off. Despite the fact that he is basically superhuman, he still is at least somewhat human. You even had Genzo and Nojiko helping out Luffy while he's stuck underwater, which kind of gives the villagers something to do in this fight, because this fight is very important to them as well. And so eventually Luffy gets freed, which is what we've been waiting for. And I love this final showdown between Luffy and Arlong. And a big part of the reason I love this fight is because during the whole thing, Arlong is talking about why he's superior. He's going on and on about all the reasons he's better, and he's only getting more and more frustrated because Luffy is so easygoing, and he just can't beat Luffy. So as the fight is going on, it's almost like his worldview is getting more and more challenged, which only angers him even more. And the fight kind of goes on. There's some interesting moments where Arlong is using the water to fight him. Anyway, the fight ends up in this room Nami used to draw charts for Arlong, and in another intelligent move by Luffy, he sees the room for what it was, which was essentially Nami's prison. So in that moment he decides, I'm just going to destroy this room. Even if I somehow lose, I will at least free Nami. He destroys the room and takes down Arlong at the same time, and there is just this incredible moment where Nami realizes what Luffy has done and thanks him. That was another incredibly touching moment. But the whole journey of this arc had a very satisfying payoff, because we open up the arc with a lot of unresolved things, a lot of mystery coming into the arc. And we do get some heart-wrenching moments along the way, only to see that the villain which caused all this pain to Nami and her whole village is finally defeated, which is just so incredibly satisfying. Nami then of course joins the crew, I like a little bit of the celebration we get at the end, but seeing them set sail towards the Grand Line was just such a heartwarming moment. Like, okay, we're finally going to the Grand Line. Overall, in my opinion, this was the best arc of the East Blue Saga. If I had not already been sold on the series, I definitely would have been after this arc. But what do you think about this particular one? I am sorry about the wait time between the last two. And if you want to see more of these, please like and subscribe for more, and thank you for watching.